Welcome. My name is Professor Tyree Hastings. I am the percussion professor at the University of Texas at Tyler. And this is going to be the first of a video series that I'm going to do covering fundamental aspects of percussion instruments. The first thing we're going to start with is grip. So where do you hold the stick? Well, if you divide the stick into 3 equal sections, then you take the pad of your thumb and the first knuckle of the index finger, and you take that the section that was closest to the back end of the stick. That's going to be approximately where what we call the fulcrum is. Now, the fulcrum is the pivot point of the stick. Now, that pivot point is, you might have to adjust it a little bit, and you can figure out how to adjust it by playing the drum, and I'll show you what I mean. So, the fulcrum is the pivot point, but it's also the place where you have the most optimal rebound off the head. So, if you take your fulcrum and you move it close to the bead of the stick, the bead is the part that strikes the drum. If you move it close to the bead, when you strike the drum, the bead will bounce off the drum and it won't go back down towards the drum. If you're too close to the back end, also known as the butt of the stick, and you strike the drum, the bead will bounce off, and then when it goes back towards the drum, it stops pretty quickly. So, in the optimal point of rebound, where the fulcrum should be on the stick, when you strike the drum, it will bounce off the drum and the sustain will last a decent amount of time. And that's how you know you've found the right spot on the stick for your fulcrum. Now, the next part of the grip is, okay, now we've got our fulcrum placed, which is where the pad and the first knuckle of the index finger are. And then, what do you do with the other fingers? Well, the other fingers can wrap around the stick, and they're not going to grip tightly the stick, but they're going to be there in contact with the stick. We call this concept contact without pressure. This is important because you can do most everything on the snare drum. This includes buzz rolls, double stroke rolls. If you don't know what those are, future videos will cover those concepts. If you do know what those are, you can do almost all of those techniques without taking your fingers off the stick. You can leave them in contact with the stick, and your palm stays in contact with the stick. You should be able to feel the back end of the stick in your palm and in your fingers during most every technique that we do. So what does happen is that your fingers will move, they'll open and close slightly when you're accomplishing different techniques, but for the most part, they will stay in contact with the stick. So we have contact without pressure, we've got our fulcrum in the right place. Now we have to figure out how far turned is our wrist going to be. The way that I like to figure out grip is I start in this French grip position, I rotate in until I feel tension in this part of my forearm, this underside of your forearm. You'll feel the tendons and the muscles tighten up. And then you rotate back until that goes away. And when that goes away, that is what I have found is the most effective position for me to play the drum. And each person is going to be different, so you'll find out what works for you. The important part is that your hands, your right hand and your left hand, are consistent. Okay, so now we're ready to play the drum. Now, when we strike the drum, there's a lot of things that go into the motion of hitting a drum. And I'm going to compare this to dribbling a basketball. When you dribble a basketball, the wrist and the arm work together. You don't have just the wrist, and you don't have just the arm. To do either of those locks one of the muscle groups. Either you're going to lock the muscle group around your elbow, and if you do that, then you're using just your wrist, or you're going to lock the muscles around your wrist and use just your elbow. Instead, there's a combination of movement between the two. Okay, so the same thing applies to hitting the drum. And I'll turn this way. You see that things move together. Okay, so once you get that combination of movement down, the next thing to consider is when you strike the drum, again, similar to dribbling a basketball, should be a point where you stop applying velocity to the stick. For example, when you dribble a basketball, there's a point where you stop adding velocity to the basketball. It falls from your hand, gravity takes over, it hits the ground, it bounces off the ground, and then your hand moves with it up and then pushes it back down. Again, same concept with the drumsticks. You're going to apply velocity to the drumstick towards the head. At some point, you're going to stop applying velocity, the stick is going to continue to fall and hit the head, and your hand's just going to move with it, and then as it bounces off the head, your hand moves with it. That's how you get a nice open and round tone from the drum. Okay, so now that we're getting a good tone, now we're going to use both hands together in an exercise from George Lawrence Stone's stick control. This exercise that I like to use is right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left. When we do this exercise, we're going to try to keep everything moving in constant motion. This means that the hand that is not playing the drum is going to keep moving while the other hand strikes the drum. Now, to do this, you'll notice as I play that there's going to be a slow upstroke off the drum to keep that hand moving. And it looks like this. So, why do we try to keep things moving in constant motion? It's similar to any sort of sport player being on the balls of their feet. If you've ever heard that, the reason we do that is because inertia is a real thing. Things that are moving want to stay in motion. Things that stop want to stay stopped. So it takes more energy to take a stick that stops and to get it moving again. And you'll see a lot of your classmates, a lot of students, they'll do this. They'll either go and stop everything down, or they'll stop everything up. So both of those things require more energy and it's less efficient. So if we can learn to keep everything moving constantly, we'll be more efficient and have more success when we play more complicated passages on the instrument. And this applies to all percussion instruments. So, we keep things moving in constant motion. Now, this concept of constant motion, the concept of dribbling a basketball and the velocity towards the drum, they all apply to something that we call touch. A lot of people will talk about having a light touch or a heavy touch. A heavy touch usually implies that what you're doing is that you're trying to play through the drum or into the drum. That means that you're continuing to add velocity towards the drum head instead of letting gravity take over. It creates a more choked sound on the drum. And a lot of times that's considered heavy. A light sound is going to be playing off the drum. And that's going to be the sound that we're talking about. A nice light round sound is going to include the arm and the wrist working in tandem together and playing off the drum rather than through it or into it. If you like this video, if you want to share it, please go ahead. If you have any questions or comments for me, you can leave a comment on the video, or you can get a hold of me through my website, tyreehastingsmusic.com, or you can email me at thastings@uttyler.edu. Thank you.